Hello, Sam.
Hello. How you doing, Alasdair?
Hello. I'm doing very well, thanks. How are you?
No, I'm good. I'm excited to be in our Series 1 in review.
I can't believe we've made it here. We are 21 episodes deep. That's a little more than knee deep. That's like up to the waist now.
That's certainly up to the waist. I also love how every time we talk about the fact we're nearing like now we've reached sort of the end of Series 1 of Doctor Who and Season 1 of Wholala, you always say, you're like, I just can't believe we got here. I didn't see it coming.
I can't believe we got here. We're in deep. Like I can hear the cold, gentle splash, the lapping of podcast all around me.
We sort of started this as like a fun hobby, just as like, oh, let's be fun, we'll see what happens. And now we're like fully invested in like the Wholala brand, I think.
Yeah. I don't remember how we started this because I know there was a conversation, but I don't really remember like what joined the dots between like at what point we really went like, we really should do this.
Yeah.
I'm glad we did.
No, me too. I remember, my boyfriend for ages has been saying like, you two should just do a podcast because you two chat about Doctor Who all the time and I'm kind of sick of listening to it.
Yeah.
And we like joked about it for ages. And then one day, I remember driving home from work and like calling you just to chat and then saying, do you know what, I've looked into it and there's a mic for 30 quid. Should I just buy this mic? And like, we keep saying we'll do it. Should we just do it for fun and like have a laugh and see what happens? And you're like, yeah, fuck it, if you want, go buy the mic. And then since then, bro, I don't think it's a joke anymore.
I don't think it's a joke anymore. Oh my God, that's literally what this is. It's wild because for the longest time, rightly so, you gatekept the audience numbers from me. So I believe no one was listening to this for the longest time. I was like, well, no one's listening to this anyway. So at some point I got the login details and I was like, wait, people listen to this? Like people are listening to this?
I know that you love to like know everything about everything. And I was like, I'm going to wait until this is like rolling a little bit before I share this with you. Cause I remember like when we first started the podcast, we like had no socials, no anything. It was just like us sharing this literally with like our friends. And then eventually I was like, maybe we should start like a Twitter or something. And I remember you were like, oh, like, I don't know. We'll see if anyone follows it. Like you can if you like, as in like, go on, Sam.
I was against it. I was like, no, we shouldn't. No one's going to engage with it. No one's going to like our Twitter. No one wants that.
And I remember I was like gatekeeping the login details for the podcast information until we were like rolling with it. And then eventually, I think it was like episode 7 or something, you were like, can I please like log in and see? And I was like, okay, sure. Yeah, you can. And I gave it to you and you were like, wait a minute, people are listening to this. And I was like, yes.
Yeah. And so like when we say like we really appreciate when people message us, like we're not kidding. Like there's always a screenshot shared back and forth between us. Like, look, someone actually enjoyed this.
I know.
Like, not to plug this early in the episode as well, but when people leave reviews as well on Spotify and Apple Music, like we're looking at those and we're deeply grateful for that stuff as well.
Oh, for sure. I mean, Wholala is fully run by Alasdair and me. We have like no one, we don't make any money from this. We don't have anyone like on a team other than like every so often my boyfriend who's a graphic designer. We're like, can you help us do this as a design?
Can you help us? Can you make what's a PNG?
Exactly.
What is that?
Whenever you do leave a comment or send us a message, it really does mean a lot. So, and it's a bit early to be plugging all that, but thank you.
It's a little early, but we want to start with a thanks, I suppose.
Yeah. I think the way that we sort of looked at it is that this is Series 1 in review. As you know, we've been looking back on all of Series 1 of Doctor Who from 2005, the Ninth Doctor series. And this will be sort of like a review and a recap of that series as a whole, what we thought of it, some information and context around the series. But also, this is going to sort of stand as the end of Season 1 of Wholala. And I think that's a very exciting thing.
It is an exciting thing because we've learn a lot, like going into the world of podcasts. I think we've, dare I toot our own little trumpet here, I think we've got a little better at it. So hopefully by now you've listened to our little Children Need bonus episode. We hope you enjoyed that one, girls. And today we're taking a look back at Series 1 as a whole. So we're looking at TV in the noughties, bringing back Who, the highs and lows of the series, and our experience reconnecting with Who and more.
So as you know, Series 1 aired with the episode Rose from 26th of March 2005, ending with the parting of the ways on the 18th of June. They have many directors and many writers throughout the series, with Russell T Davies being the showrunner for the whole series. Now, overall on IMDb, this whole season aired very well. The lowest rating for an episode in Series 1 was a 6.9, and this was Aliens of London, which I think we both kind of saw coming. One of the Slovene ones would probably be the lower rated.
I think we could have predicted that. Yeah.
The Empty Child, The Doctor Dances, and The Parting of the Ways are all tying for top place with a 9.0 score on IMDb as the best of the series.
Okay.
But I think, we've got to kind of cast our minds back to the early mid-noughties. We're not in the same world we were anymore. I mean, looking into some information for this,
God, no.
Civil partnerships didn't in the whole of this series, including the minisode which aired I think in November, civil partnerships in the UK weren't a thing. They weren't legalized until the 5th of December 2005, long after this series had aired. Additionally, fun fact, gay marriage wasn't even legalized in the UK until March 2014.
9 years away.
Literally 9 years away, sitting between the time of the Doctor and Deep Breath. Peter Capaldi being the Doctor when gay marriage, what is time? I mean, this is the 10th anniversary of Peter Capaldi's regeneration. That's crazy.
What is time, truly? I mean, everyone was on Microsoft Vista.
Yeah.
There was no iPhone for another 2 years. Revenge of the Sith hadn't come out in cinemas yet.
It's wild.
Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire was the next film, not out until November. We're a year before Twitter as well, and we're also more than a year away from the Nintendo Wii. So hopefully that places us in time.
We've got some nice stuff to look forward to then. Gay marriage and a Wii.
We do. Yeah, we got a few nice things. First of all, it was a genuine shock that Doctor Who came back. Because after 1989, many within the TV industry and at the BBC thought that the show was past its prime and there just wasn't an audience for it anymore. So in 1990, Jonathan Powell, he was the BBC's head of drama, he was quoted saying, "There's no way back for Doctor Who, certainly not in the form it took back in the 60s and 70s. And in 1996, year that I was born, the BBC One controller said that Doctor Who is a great cult series, but that's where it should stay. It's had its day. I think it'd be a mistake to bring it back. So the prevailing attitude at the time was that Doctor Who was outdated and irrelevant and it run its course. And I think it was pretty shocking that it made such a triumphant return.
Well, it's funny. I remember seeing, I think not at the time, because I certainly wasn't paying attention to those kinds of things, but in later years, having watched sort of news articles and interviews around the time that it was coming back, so many people, and like I said, especially the BBC, they were so pessimistic about Doctor Who. They were really the Pepper Pots on wheels, what are they going to bring them back? They were it seemed like no one wanted this, even though so many people clearly did want this.
Yeah, and I think when it did go off air, I really think a lot of people were pleased to see the back of it.
I think it's a good point what they'd said there about how Doctor Who couldn't come back in the format it was in the 60s and 70s, because I think that kind of Doctor Who, which has so much love and following, I big classic Who stan here, I think that it had run its course at that point. I think if you had brought Doctor Who back as if it was in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I actually remember reading that one of the writers from the Classic Who had contacted Russell T Davies when the show was coming back and said, "Oh, if you want me to write for you, I will." And Russell basically was just like, "No, we're okay," because I think he wanted to quite clearly cut ties with Classic Who and say this is still set in the same universe, but this is a new thing. We want to take it in a different direction.
Yeah, it needed a reinvention, and I think if you've ever seen as well, I don't know if you've seen this concept art that was done for the TV movie in the 90s, there was some really interesting ideas about, for example, what the Daleks could look like. I don't know if you ever saw the Spider Dalek design, but
I've seen Spider Dalek designs certainly be brought back in Big Finish and stuff.
So pre that, there was something, it had something to do with Spielberg. I don't know. There was some horrible, really menacing, but just like a horrible design that I'm glad Hollywood kind of never got near. And that's kind of one avenue that I'm pleased we never got.
I'm looking at them. I've looked it up.
Yeah, American Who is probably something that
they kind of unfold into themselves, right?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I think there's a reality probably where Doctor Who continued at the wrong time and could have been launched in a very different way, and I think it probably felt a different demise.
Yeah, I think that it's with shows like Doctor Who, I think it's very important to know when you're doing it and also who's doing it. And I think Russell was like the perfect person to reignite the fire.
I also want to talk about British TV in the mid-noughties. It was a real mixed bag.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of crass and low-quality programming dominating the airwaves. And this is kind of pre-streaming services as well. So you've kind of got what you've got.
Yeah.
So the overall quality of British TV was often criticised, and I think that kind of gave rise to, I mean, first of all, the finale of this series, which pokes fun at kind of like, where does this end up? You know, if things keep getting more extreme and we keep getting more desensitized to the content that we're putting out, where does this go? And we also had then Black Mirror start not too long after this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of that really was looking at kind of the culture of exploitative, voyeuristic, sensationalist content. So Big Brother, Jeremy Kyle, Fat Families. You've probably seen clips from that.
Fat Families was just something. Fat Families in the Pod. I think of the Pod as well.
Yeah, the Pod. Oh my God, the Pod. Where they did the make under.
Yeah. Awful.
Just a lot of like shaming people for the way they looked, the way they behaved.
I mean, even shows that are on today, like just the concept of like talent shows, I think things like The X Factor, myself included, one of the big draws to it was that you would watch the auditions and see the terrible ones and like sort of point and laugh. And I think it's become a lot less like that now. I think you are watching for the talent, but you would, like, if you look up a compilation of like best X Factor moments, they're normally from like, say, 2003 to like 2010, bad, like embarrassing moments where people are like pointing and laughing at people. Like, it was very much that era.
It's funny as well. Do you remember Susan Boyle in Britain's Got Talent? That was a phenomenon when she got big, and the whole premise of the shock of Susan Boyle was this woman is too ugly to be talented. There is no way she can be talented because she's so ugly. And she came on stage, and I mean, she's not even hideous. She's just like a kind of a graying woman,
but also having the category of men, women, groups, and over 24s. Like, to classify that if you are 25
beyond your prime,
you are in the same category as like a 93-year-old because you're past your sell by.
Yeah. So I mean, anyway, also not to be, I'm not an expert on this, but it feels that sci-fi wasn't so commonplace on British TV as perhaps it is now, because I think now technology allows us to do sci-fi and VFX a lot more inexpensively and convincingly than we ever used to be able to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, completely. I think that at the time that Classic Who was on, there was a real surge in sci-fi. There was obviously Star Trek was huge, Red Dwarf was on, Doctor Who was on, and I think by like the early noughties that had all kind of died down. I think that in the same way with a lot of different genres, I think it happened with westerns, I think it happened with rom-coms. I think kind of eras of shows and movies kind of like have their peaks and valleys, and I think maybe with like Star Wars coming in or things like that, I think this was just like the perfect time for Doctor Who to come back.
It was the time to be ambitious, and God, did they pull it off. With that, I think, Sam, do you want to jump in? Let's do a very quick recap of the story of Series 1 and the themes of Series 1.
For anyone who may not have watched Series 1 of Doctor Who or listened to any of this podcast, my advice would be go back to episode 1 of the podcast and re-listen. But otherwise, Doctor Who Series 1 followed the return of the Doctor in his 9th incarnation as he met Rose Tyler, saving her from the Autons. After saving the world, she joins him in the TARDIS as his companion for adventures throughout time and space, concluding in a battle against the Daleks which left the Doctor dying, forcing him to regenerate into a new man, David Tennant.
And then the other big arc running through this as well is that throughout all these adventures, the Doctor is dealing with the survivor guilt of this huge war that's happened off screen in the years between Doctor Who being on air. And all of his people are dead, killed by the Daleks. He's had to do something really horrible and really unforgivable and terrible to end that war. And so that kind of informs all of his actions in this as well.
It's so interesting because obviously for you and me, we sort of joined Doctor Who with the revival. And so even though we've both since gone back and watched Classic Who, it's not a novel concept to have the Time War be so prevalent in the show. But for fans of the classic show who are like coming back to Doctor Who, that must have been a wild choice. Like, that must have been so big for them to realise, like, oh God, everything we thought we knew has changed, basically.
Yeah, which of course was very deliberate to kind of cut that break with it and say, you know, things aren't quite how we left them now.
And I think that was necessary. I think that there was always dark in classic Who. And I think a lot of that has kind of become quite memed. The Doctor snapping someone's neck once, bath of acid, things like that.
We don't talk about those.
Yeah, we don't talk about those. I think the jump between classic and new Who, the biggest thing is that I feel like there were real stakes, real emotion, and real drama, I'll say.
A lot of great themes that we explored in this series as well. I've tried to pull some of these out.
Mm-hmm.
One is, of course, the importance of companionship. And I think mental health kind of pulls into this as well.
Yeah.
The power of human connections and relationships. And that's all shown through Rose, who is kind of supposed to just be an ordinary person who could be anyone. The Doctor has been traveling alone for a long time, and like I said, he's dealing with all the survivor guilt. He's like badly traumatized, and in simply being around Rose, he finds new purpose and new meaning in life. And she kind of helps him forgive himself and kind of renews the joy and excitement of traveling. Something we've talked about a lot that we really like is the sense of danger of time travel as well. This one highlights the fact that changing the past can have a significant consequence for the present and for the future, and that time travel can be used for good, it can be used for evil, and sometimes it's really hard for the Doctor to know whether he can interfere or not.
I think that was something that was properly explored in New Who. It was kind of touched on in classic Who about consequences, and I think with returning characters like the Master, he's quite a good example of how, how many times has the Master died? I mean, even in New Who, where they'd have this big thing, we're going to kill the Master finally, and then he comes back and no one really cares, so he comes back, he's just back. And I think that in New Who, they more focused on overarching stories, which I'm sure we'll dive into a bit more, and the consequences of things in previous episodes affecting things in later episodes. And I think that sort of grounded the show in a way that it needed to be grounded for the audience that were watching it at the time.
It also grapples, and I think it always has done this, but it does grapple with complex moral questions. I think the classic show's always done this very well as well. I'm thinking particularly of the whole Fourth Doctor, do I have the right speech?
Genesis of the Daleks.
Scenes, maybe one of the best scenes in the show's history, arguably.
Oh, completely, yeah.
But it highlights those grey areas that exist in morality. The Doctor's sometimes stuck between two bad options. Decisions have real consequences, and it challenges this idea of a clear-cut kind of goodie and baddie. And it looks instead at the complexity of, I think, both human nature and even these one-dimensional villains. It adds something there. There's a twist, which is really fun and mature. So, we have the Slitheen, who are like comically villainous characters in
4 and 5.
4 and 5. And later on, it kind of explores like, raised in a different time by different people, would they have been someone else? And it looks at that on some level. The empty child as well, appears to be this horrible, malicious, evil force kind of wandering the streets and converting people into this horrible empty gas mask. But actually, it's an innocent child that's been kind of harmed by actually quite benevolent nanogenes that are looking to repair people. And the Dalek as well, when it gets corrupted by Rose's DNA, it adds this complexity where it starts to question itself. It thinks about the way that it follows orders, and it shows the way it's been grown to hate, and it's starting to experience more than that, and suddenly it's confused and eventually wants to kill itself. So it has that level to it as well.
Exactly. I mean, it's funny you mentioned this, Slitheen. You know me. Slitheen stand till the end. Reliable. Nothing if not consistent.
Me too.
You're completely right in that the Slitheen, I'd say they're mainly comedy value. The fart jokes and all this and that. Yeah. But what we called the filler episode of the series, Boomtown, it kind of is one of the episodes that, more so than a lot of the others, does really show the morality of the Doctor. And it's like, does he have the right to be judge, jury, and executioner? And I think that's a interesting thing to reflect on, in that a lot of the time the Doctor is just, the hero who comes in, he saves the day. And I think episodes like Father's Day, where Rose says to him, like, it's all well and good when you're zipping around to different planets and saving people, but when it's me saving my dad, that's bad. And the Doctor has to explain about fixed points in time and stuff like that. You really, in those episodes, get to have a look at the Doctor's morality in himself and what he believes he can do, what he thinks has the right to do, what he thinks he shouldn't do, and then how he reacts to other people doing things. That's all sort of weighed in from that.
Yeah, and I like when they do this as well, because the Doctor is, in a sense, a totally overpowered character.
Oh, for sure.
And I think it's good that they keep the Doctor in check now and then, and have the Doctor make really fatal mistakes. I think is really great.
And I think that the Ninth Doctor in particular, not that other Doctors don't necessarily do it well, but I've been rewatching some Capaldi ones lately, who I love as well, but they often sort of dumb down his moral sense. He's like, well, this is the right thing to do, so we're going to do this. Whereas I think it's good when someone like 9 or 10 really like toes the line of like, do I have the right to do this? Like you said with the Fourth Doctor.
Yeah. Or goes too far.
Exactly. Or goes too far. One thing that I think is really interesting is that series 1 sort of was a Kickstarter for Doctor Who, looking into the importance of diversity. I think that both with the people they were hiring, as in like cast and crew, I think that it's very important that Russell T Davies is a queer showrunner for the show. And I think, like you said earlier, having someone with big ideas, someone big and gay coming into this, I think that he brought so much of his own self. And you look at his previous work and then work that he's done later, I think that a lot of his like fantastical ideas really get brought into the show in series 1. And he's always joked about how he would love to have made Doctor Who, and I mean he will now, with a bigger budget, because he had so many huge ideas he wanted to do. But then I think a lot of the diversity comes in the character-driven dialogue.
Yeah.
I think that we can't I think that we have to look at like Rose coming in from a working class background. She really felt like a fully rounded character. I think that looking Captain Jack, he's the first sort of openly queer Doctor Who character. I think that also then came through in later series, both with Russ Davies and after that, where the show sort of tackled things like racism, classism, homophobia, and we started seeing, companions of colour, more diverse sort of people in and out of the TARDIS. I think the families of the companions, and I do think that Russell T Davies bringing in series 1 of Doctor Who was kind of like the kindling for that fire.
100%. And I don't know that theme was ever so strong before 2005, where I really feel like beyond that point it's really been baked into the fabric of the show. And I think
completely
because of that, the culture around it as well, and I think definitely our experiences of being part of the kind of fan community as well, is absolutely one that's very welcoming and very accepting, and I think one that's quite progressive as well in terms of, I think, generally kind of the shared values of Who fans.
Completely. No, I completely agree. I think that a big message for the show is about acceptance and not judging people at face value. And they was kind of poke fun at like Torchwood, for example, where they're like, oh, you shouldn't shoot first, ask questions later. Like, you need to give people a chance and get to know them and not just judge someone right away. And I think a lot of those are allegories that the queer community of Who followers have sort of taken, and it's really shaped people. I mean, like you said, both of us have been, we grew up watching the show, and I think that kind of became baked into us, and it certainly affected me in my coming out and in my acceptance. And I think not consciously even, maybe it's just become a real comfort to see this benevolent person, this benevolent being in the Doctor, traveling the universe and just trying to sort of spread acceptance and hope and love and all that good stuff.
I totally agree. And I think it's done in a way that's authentic enough that it doesn't feel like you're being kind of lectured to. It feels that you're almost being kind of shown a role model that you really, really like. And yeah, I mean, testament as well to the actors who've had these roles, right? They're so bloody likable.
Exactly.
You want to like this guy. You want to be like this guy. You want to be good enough that the Doctor would want to take you. So, I think that's really important.
Completely.
Let's talk about specifically the highs and lows of this series. What we've talked about in these episodes, the standout things that we really loved, the things that weren't so great, both on and off screen. What are those things?
To jump right in with a high, one thing that I love about this series in particular, I mean, it does carry through to other series as well, but I think this series so well, it didn't feel like you were watching, this is one series of a sci-fi, and every episode is a sci-fi. It felt like every episode had its own genre. And I think that a lot of that comes from bringing in the different writers and directors who do those things so well. So, for example, Father's Day is a tragedy. You're watching a tragedy where it's someone dealing with grief and loss and regret and making mistakes. Then you jump to The Empty Child and it's horror and fear and suspense. Then we mosey on down to Cardiff and we're in Boomtown, and suddenly it's a comedy. And I just always think of the bit where Margaret Celine is running away and teleporting, and the Doctor like sonics her back, and she kind of goes woo, like Looney Tunes almost. It's kind of like Looney Tunes comedy at some points. And then you go to Parting of the Ways, and it's this huge space opera with starships and satellites and flying mechanoid robots, but they're not robots because they've got squids inside. Like, it hits so many genres, and I feel like I'm a really big advocate in general for not pigeonholing a type of film, TV media into one whole. I think that a lot of people think, for example, animation is a genre, and no, animation is not a genre. You can explore so many different things, and I think the same thing happens with sci-fi. So many people, I'm always trying to get my boyfriend to watch Doctor Who, and I think I've finally given up and just realised it's not something he cares to watch.
He'll come in November.
Yeah, he'll come around in November. But he always says, he's like, oh, I just don't like sci-fi. Sci-fi is not for me. And I think Series 1 is a really great example of saying this isn't just sci-fi. Not that there's anything wrong with quote unquote just sci-fi. It's not the same every week. You're going to be getting a completely different story, a completely different point of view, a completely different genre. And that is just so exciting as a viewer to really not know what you're going to expect next week.
I totally agree. I think that's something that we've really picked up on throughout, is that you really get immersed into kind of the spirit of that episode, which is wonderful. And that's part of what feels so exciting about kind of where are we going next when you go somewhere in Doctor Who. There's so many intense and emotional scenes in this series. The ones that come to mind for me, God, they're depressing when I read them back. The quote, "I met Dad," when Jackie's in the TARDIS and she's like, "I've actually rewritten your memory of an event by being the person who was with my dad, your ex-husband. In your past, I was there to be with him because of the childhood stories you told me. I wanted to be that person." Like, incredibly poignant moment. And I think as well, when the Doctor is facing the Dalek and she's standing in the way of him shooting it, and he kind of lowers the gun and he says like, "Oh, Rose, they're all dead." So many moments like that, you know, like even just written on the page, I think for a Who fan, you know, those quotes alone, "I met Dad," it just so intense.
It's so good.
Just fucking excellent.
It's so impactful. And I also think that the just class acting from all parties in this. I mean, like in the scene where she's talking about meeting her dad, I just love, because I hate it, like it's so uncomfortable to watch, but I just love it. The bit where she's saying that, and then Jackie just sort of, she's saying very calm, she's like, "No, don't say that. And then eventually Jackie just screams at her 19-year-old daughter. She's like, just stop it. And she runs out, and then Rose is breaking down in tears. Like, it's such an emotional scene. Like, it's so good.
Great. As well, thinking about the Dalek one specifically, there's not many shows where you could try and have an emotional moment with this kind of wet animatronic squid reaching to the sunlight, and that would work. There's really not many places you can do that.
Another high for me on this, and we have kind of briefly touched on it, is that I like that Series 1 of the show, it does lean on classic Who. It doesn't pretend like it never existed. It's not a complete reboot, but they completely did not rely on it. It wasn't a case of, oh, well, if you didn't watch the old one, you won't get the new one. And I think that in today's world, and again, this is another example of, I think, perfect timing, perfect people. I think that we're living in this Marvel world, and don't get me wrong, I love watching Marvel film and TV and stuff, but everything has to be a connected universe. Everything has to be interconnected. I think if you created a show like Doctor Who now based on a previous property like Classic Who, I think that Series 1, they're like, we're not going to get the viewers in unless we really hammer home that it's the same thing. Do you remember that show that you loved? And I think we would have been filled with cameos of classic Doctors, and the companion's mum would have been a previous companion, and all of the monsters would have been ones from the previous series, and it would have felt very sort of tacked on and samey, and I don't think it would have done well. And I think they made the real correct decision to reference things. I think there's that really tender, which is an odd word to use in the context of the scene, moment where the Doctor looks at the Cyberman head in Van Satten's museum, and he's like, oh, it's an old friend, well, an old enemy. And I think that that's like a real sort of nod to what's gone before as we're following what's happening now. And I think it struck the perfect balance. Then, obviously, in later seasons of, bringing back the odd person, I think one of our favourite moments, I'm sure, was when they brought back Sarah Jane in the next series. But series 1 really struck the balance well.
Yeah, that's true. And I think as well, thinking even then to when they kind of gave it, another soft reboot for Matt Smith, I think they are quite conscious to try and keep doing that. And they are careful, for example, Torchwood, I don't think that ever came up in Matt Smith's era. Or Unit didn't come up again until quite late. I think they try and almost give a soft re-entry point as well for the fans, which I'm sure they'll do again now, and start gradually reintroducing characters with context so that you kind of get an introduction to them again.
The whole point, I think, in a show like this is if you're a companion of the Doctor, you won't know who the Daleks are. You've never met Unit before. You don't know who all these characters are. So you will have them reintroduced to you. So if we're following the companion, as obviously we were with Rose in this series, the audience don't need, or shouldn't need, if it's well written, a comprehensive understanding of what's happened before in the show, because it should be introduced to the companion as well.
I think a low for me, if I had to pull it out, I think there have been some low episodes. Aliens of London and World War III. When we were rewatching these quite a while ago now, that was the first one I think I said to you, like, yeah, this was the first one that didn't seem to quite hit for me. They were a little too cheesy. The humor didn't quite land. The clash between, I think, the practical prosthetics, the costumes, and then their kind of CG versions didn't quite work. They moved differently. Yeah. They felt a bit weird. It was very obvious when a different one was being used. And it was meant to feel quite epic, and it just didn't quite land. We did get the introduction of Harriet Jones, great character. Unit came back. But apart from that, that was about it. And on that line as well, we had one other episode that wasn't quite so strong, and I think that was Boomtown.
You just hate this. I'm a Slitheen stan. You can't change me, Alasdair.
I was surprised going back to it how much of a filler it felt. And it felt that the point of the episode was to give the Doctor kind of a moral quandary and kind of like, ooh, will he really take me to my death, to my execution? And ultimately, the Doctor didn't have to make that choice.
Yeah, that's fair.
It does set up the finale in some practical ways, but tonally, it doesn't feel like everything's about to kick off. It feels, a bit too homely where it's set. It feels a bit pedestrian. It feels a bit local. It feels a bit...
It's so great to see so many locals.
The
Doctor walking through Cardiff. In retrospect, does Boomtown feel like a soft pilot for Torchwood?
No.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, I get it. I respect it.
But no.
And then give us another low.
Well, I think the biggest low for me, and I don't really know if it's anyone's fault in particular, is, as we've mentioned, this was effectively a soft reboot. It was also effectively a pilot series. No one really knew if anyone was going to watch it. So I don't think the BBC invested... I think they invested a lot of money in it, especially for like a pilot series. But they didn't invest as much as I think they would have had they known how successful it was going to be. I think you made a really good point with the juxtapositions between like some of the iffier costumes with the Slitheen and then the really jarring jump to whenever you see like a CGI Slitheen and how it looks and moves completely differently. A lot of the space shots kind of are a bit dicey in their animation or in their compositing. I think I've said before that a lot of the issues are often not with the actual animation or the rendering, but with how they're composited into the scene. And the fact that the whole series was kind of shot a lot more standard definition than anything coming after it was. And again, a lot of that's down to the budgets of what cameras they were able to get at the time. I know that the soundtrack sounds different because they didn't have a full orchestra until the Christmas special, but it just felt like the budgetary constraints on series 1 really stop a lot of either casual viewers or people who haven't watched the show, they stop them from watching it. A lot of people just say, oh, start on series 2 when David Tennant comes in, or start on series 5 when Matt Smith comes in. And I think a lot of more casual viewers will skip this series, which is a huge mistake because it's an incredible, as we've spent a whole season of Wholala talking about, it's an incredible series.
We spent 21 episodes trying to convince people it's an incredible series. It's difficult though, because no matter what we do, we can't see it totally fresh. Like, we've really tried to approach it in a fresh way, but ultimately we are blinded a little by the nostalgia, and we can't quite get past that. But I know that a lot of people say that it's very difficult to get past. You know, the effects are quite jarring, you know, if you're used to the kind of caliber that we get in modern shows, and then you go back to series 1 of Doctor Who, it is jarring.
Yeah.
And it being kind of locked into standard definition, there's nothing we can do with that now. That is kind of how it is presented. There's very little we can do to kind of tidy that up. So it's tricky.
Exactly. I mean, you couldn't watch an episode of The Mandalorian and then series 1 of Doctor Who and then see them as exactly the same thing, like nowadays. Even though, like, personally, I enjoy Doctor Who more than The Mandalorian. But again, nostalgia.
Yeah, so I'm excited as well for this, you know, that in November we're going to get a fresh, high quality HD entry point for new fans, I think, to jump in.
Exactly.
I think we're overdue one of those. I think the last one really was series 5, so I think this will be good.
Yeah, no, completely.
And to finish on a high, they'd be missing out if they didn't watch the series, I think, really, because they'd be missing Christopher Eccleston.
No, completely. I mean, Billie Piper is an incredible actress and has an incredible portrayal of Rose, which we're lucky enough to then see throughout series 2, and she comes back in later series, and then she comes back for the 50th playing the Bad Wolf. So we get to see a lot of her, but I think one of the saddest things about series 1 is that we only got one series, Christopher Eccleston. I would hate for anyone to miss his series by skipping series 1, because he really is just such a great Doctor. He's so different from anything that came before. I think he brought a lot more darkness, which is reflected through the choice of having the Time War. But he's also so funny, and he can be really silly, and he just has like this huge grin. He again, like with all the genres and the plot points, he just walks the line perfectly between being a lovable, friendly, approachable Doctor and then being someone with such weight and gravitas and fury beneath the skin. I thought it was amazing.
I agree. He really strikes the balance that I feel is essential, I think, for anyone to ever play the Doctor. You have to be able to play the lightness, the comedy, the hopefulness, the joyfulness, and the human touch. You don't have to be human. You need to keep one foot in the fact that this is an alien and he is kind of a spectator to human culture. But then you also have to be able to do those kind of the real convincing fury, the rage, the frightening moments, the unpredictability, someone you really don't want to get on the wrong side of. And I think he does both very well. I think when he's in those lighter moments, he's someone that you really want to travel with. He can be very funny. I know that it's funny enough, he's talked before about the fact I think he was nervous about doing the comedy aspect of it. He didn't think he'd do that well. I think he does it incredibly well. And as well, the darker moments, you know, he's the perfect kind of post-war Doctor. So it's good.
Completely.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah,
he's great.
It's good. And I mean, it's like I said, it's so sad we only got him for the time we did. We won't delve into it too much. If you want to listen to a bit more of the history and the deep dive into why Chris Treston left the show, you can look back to our episode New Teeth That's Weird, where we look at the finale of series 1. But yeah, just so sad we only got him for one series. He was a great Doctor.
I know, only one. We could have had more.
Could have had more.
I want to talk a little bit then about the impact of Series 1, both for the BBC and culturally. In terms of the impact for the BBC, it was pretty huge. The success of Doctor Who has gone a huge way to maintain the BBC's reputation as a bastion of quality TV programming, because it's been praised, the show, kind of throughout its eras for great storytelling, great performances, bringing in incredible actors at different levels, kind of as members of the main cast, for up-and-coming actors, It's won a whole bunch of awards and accolades over the years. And it's also helped the BBC, I think, reach a new, younger, more diverse audience. And it's helped keep the broadcaster relevant.
Yeah, no, I think that bringing it back was one of the best decisions the BBC has made to keep itself relevant. I think, especially when I think of like sort of series 6 era, like what would that be, like series like sort of 2011, 2012. Doctor Who was a global franchise, and it still is, obviously. It still is a global franchise, but that it really kicked down the doors and became bigger than it ever was, and kept the BBC becoming bigger and bigger. And I think that then allowed the BBC to create shows like, at least in part, helped the BBC make shows like Sherlock and be taken much more serious for different dramas and what they can do with budget. And yeah, Doctor Who, I think it did wonders for everyone.
Yeah, it was massive commercially, so not just the reputation, but a huge commercial success. Obviously, merchandise sales, licensing agreements, all of that generated massive revenue. I think back towards the 50th anniversary year, there were some stats published. There weren't exact numbers for how much money Doctor Who itself was making for the BBC in terms of through kind of merchandising, BBC Worldwide, but was making a really big proportion of all of the sales of BBC Worldwide. So they said something like, almost like half or more of their sales were generated by 12 brands. And that was things like Top Gear, Sherlock. So Doctor Who was a massive, massive chunk of that at the time.
Completely.
So that money was reinvested back into making other shows. Not all of that just went back into Doctor Who. I think a lot of people were frustrated by this at one point because it wasn't so clear how that model worked. They were saying, how come Doctor Who is doing so well with things like the Doctor Who Experience, with spin-offs, with merch, with DVDs, physical media, but Doctor Who's budget seemed like relatively fixed. And the answer is because the BBC has to reinvest that money to make sure that kind of they're delivering value for different kinds of audiences, not just for Doctor Who fans with that money.
Sad as that is, but also completely understandable.
Sad as that is. And then culturally as well, I think Doctor Who's helped break new ground, I think, imagining the role of science fiction in pop culture. It's not the only franchise that's done this, but I think throughout its lifetime, it's done this in a pretty big way. It's one of those very accessible franchises that's been entertaining for audiences of all ages. I guess kind of in a way, I think that Marvel has that kind of universal across age appeal. It's not something that's for adults, it's not something that's for kids. It's genuinely a universal product.
Completely, yeah. No, when I think of big franchises that are sort of universally enjoyed, I think of things like Marvel, I think of Star Wars, I think of Doctor Who, and I certainly think that I can't think of many other BBC created shows hold such global stature in the world of sci-fi and beyond as Doctor Who.
And of course, it set up a lot for what's to come really with Doctor Who, what we expect from it now. We've got whole series story arcs. I feel like that was broadly new instead of kind of contained 4-part, 5-part, 6-part stories, and instead kind of having a story that would cross kind of a series or even multiple series. We have what we expect now from kind of higher production values, more CGI, location filming, a much more cinematic feel to Doctor Who. And I think one really important thing as well that we haven't really talked so much about yet is that the role of the companion has really changed by this point as well. I think before 1989, we had companions who were much more passive characters, not all the time, but primarily the role really was to be there and give the, weigh in for the audience, ask questions, give the Doctor the exposition. And in the revived series, it feels much more that there's a deliberate effort to give the companion a much more active and empowered role. They're there kind of not just to be an assistant to the Doctor, but also being capable characters who actually challenge the Doctor. And I think we have much more switched on, assertive and independent characters who can kind of hold their own and also point out when the Doctor's wrong. And I think as well, Donna kind of almost, deliberately says, like, she feels that's her job, really. She says, don't travel on your own because I think you need someone to stop you sometimes. So it's more than kind of helping you out. It's actually, you need someone to challenge you, which is really great.
I think that it was a really good decision from the BBC's part to consciously move away from calling them the Doctor's assistant and start calling them the Doctor's companion. In classic Who, they were always the assistant. It was the Doctor and their assistant. It was normally, a woman in like tight outfits there to scream. And I think that, like you said, we definitely did have characters in classic Who that sort of fought that stereotype. I think that Tegan is a really good example. I think that Ace is a really good sort of precursor to what the modern Doctor Who companion is.
And Sarah Jane.
But so arguably, I think Sarah Jane was when she came back. If you look back on Sarah Jane episode, she's a strong character, but a lot of that was her screaming. Like they'd call it the Sarah Jane scream. She'd be like, "Doctor, help me!" And I think she did really play that damsel in distress, which is why I'm so glad that when they brought her back, she was like, "No, I'm being big main character energy." She was like, "I'm here. I am an assertive person, and I have my own spin-off show."
Yeah.
But she certainly was a strong character. I think there were lots of strong women and lots of strong characters in classic Who. And I think that they became... And I think then when we moved into the revival of the show, they became a lot more sort of fully fledged, real people. Rose won the under-7s gymnastics. She got the bronze. If nothing else, we just know a lot more about them. And I think that, like we were saying earlier before, you start seeing a lot more diversity in the companions. And I just think that was a really great sort of kick-off with Rose and Power State.
Yeah, we had Bill Potts was the first openly gay full-time companion. Yasmin Khan, I think, the first Muslim companion. Both representing underrepresented communities, which is great. And I think as well important just because I think a lot of the charm of Doctor Who really is believing it could be you. You need to think that you could be a companion. That's a lot of what Rusty Davies said the joy of Doctor Who was for him in his childhood, was running down the street and thinking, imagine that you turned the corner and you saw the TARDIS there and you could run away. And that kind of is the joy of it. I think everyone who loves Doctor Who has imagined that at least a few times, right? Like, where would you go? What would you do? What adventures would you be on? And that gives the viewers a way in, is like, you have to be able to see yourself, I think, in that companion role.
Completely. And I think that, like you're saying, it's so important for people to see themselves. And a lot of, as a queer viewer, and, we always say we're Doctor Who, we always say we're Wholala, a Doctor Who queer podcast. And I think that growing up queer and watching Doctor Who, growing up and watching TV, there's a lot of queer coding. There's a lot of like queer coded characters and it's not very explicit. And I think when you see people like Bill or people like Yaz, especially in Yaz's case where you're seeing her sort of discovering her sexuality and the fluidity of it in real time, basically, like as we're watching it, I think that as a queer viewer, that is so important and impactful. And like I said, our whole lives have been sort of shaped by this show. Me and Alistair first met at London Pride in 2019, I want to say. I think 2019.
Yeah.
And we literally met at a Pride event, as we've spoken before in the podcast. So many Doctor Who fans are queer, to the point where when the series 4 finale happened, they obviously screened it in London in the middle of Pride. And I think queer Doctor Who fans are running Doctor Who Twitter at this point.
It's amazing. Like, the impact, honestly, I think it's had on like gay youth is incredible, because I so many times have been like meeting new gays at a party or something, and at some point in the conversation, like, the podcast comes up and it's like, oh, do you watch Doctor Who? And they're like, oh my God, like, I love Doctor Who. Like, oh, I don't watch it anymore. I used to watch it a lot. And there are so many who would just, and then someone's like ears will prick in the corner, like, you're talking about Doctor Who? And it's like, people love it. Like, people don't always like talk about it so openly, but I think like even people who used to watch it, it's kept a really special place in people's hearts. A lot of people, I think, are very keen to see what happens next, aren't so like sure what's going on right now. They're like, wait, is David Tennant the Doctor, or should he get with the Doctor, or when is it on? Is it on now? Is it still on anymore? And I think a lot of people are really, really keen to see what happens next, which I think is a very exciting time for us to be at. But yeah, queer Who fans, they're bloody prolific. We're everywhere.
And it's so funny what you said about, I feel like, queer or not, I feel like a lot of people sort of become closeted Doctor Who fans, where
Yes.
I had some sort of friends of friends round the other day for drinks, and Alasdair for Christmas got me the box set of Series 4, which is proudly sort of on display on my TV shelf.
You're welcome.
And this woman who was around for drinks, who I'd not met before, she was a friend of a friend, she sort of got up and walked up to him, picked it up, and she was like, "I'm so sorry, I have to ask, whose is this?" And I was like, "Oh, that's mine." And she was like, "I love Doctor Who."
Yeah.
But it's exactly what you said. It's the people who are like sort of similar ages to us who grew up with it and then kind of like, you know, drifted away and stopped watching it. But because they grew up with it, and I think it really embedded itself into people our age at that time, that even if you're not watching it now, you'll be like, "Oh, I loved that show. Like I grew up with it. I grew up with Chris Ferguson and David Tennant and all of that." And it sticks with people.
Yeah. Two things I want to say. One thing as well is it may not really seem that groundbreaking that Doctor Who has had these characters in it, but I just want people to think about the total reluctance, like, you know, Marvel had and still have to have, you know, front and center queer characters who aren't either on kind of a cameo level or aren't
A joke.
Or aren't part of a press release about like pat on the back, we included a queer one, or part of a TV spin-off, right? Like it's amazing. And only very recently, you know, I think like, for example, in the Eternals, they you know, fair play to them, you know, they showed a gay man with a family life and a child, and they committed to a positive representation there. Of course, they censored it in countries where, you know, that's less favorable. And they still screened it and they still made their money. You know, they still went ahead and pumped out their edited version and made their money from that. But, you know, some shows have been so reluctant to do that. What other franchise am I thinking of? Star Wars as well, right? They've been so reluctant to show queer characters for such a long time. And I think only now are starting about that.
Did you watch The Rise of Skywalker, the last of the most recent trilogy?
Oh, yeah.
Did you catch the lesbians at the end?
You know, truly, I'm not sure who they were. Who was it?
Like, they made a whole big song, and don't come after me, Mickey Mouse, but Disney, they love to, like you said, pat themselves on the back and be like, "Oh, it's the first gay kiss, it's the first this, it's the first that," and it never really is. And they made this whole big song and dance in their promo for the movie, being like, "Oh, we've got the first ever openly like lesbian couple in Star Wars." And it was these two characters that were very much like side characters. And then right at the end, there's a big, wide, sort of panning celebratory shot. And you see them kiss, like in the far background
in the far
of
corner.
a panning shot. And
Easily
it's like,
chopped
come
again
on
for
now.
foreign audiences. Nice.
Oh, I'm sure. Easily cuttable. But it's crazy that when you think about 2005, like we were saying, pre-marriage equality,
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, you might think like, okay, well, you know, it's not that groundbreaking. Like, really, honestly, these big franchises, I really think are so hesitant to do this. You can see why. If you think about as well, a recent episode of The Last of Us, episode 3 was entirely focused on a gay romance, which was done so beautifully. I mean, honestly, one of the best kind of hours of TV there is, and devastating as well. And that got review bombed, you know, immediately.
Yeah.
Fans are up in arms about that. They're, you know, blah, 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 there's not
bringing the gays on my TV.
Yeah, and it's like, well, wait until you find out about. Is that a spoiler? I won't say anymore. but yeah, it's just like, come on, grow up.
So I really truly believe that societies change when they see change, and a big way that people see change or see potential is when they watch it on TV or when they see it in the cinema. Blue Planet, when Blue Planet aired, I think there was something like a 24% increase in people buying recyclable water bottles and using those instead of one-use plastic bottles. And I think that, I'm not saying, you know, Doctor Who is the reason why we now have marriage equality, but I think
but it all has a part, right? It all
has a part. I think
thing.
that completely. I think shows like, and I can't commend Russell T Davies enough. I know that I'm, you know, harping on like a broken record, but all of his shows, Queer as Folk, It's a Sin, Years and Years, Banana, Cucumber, Doctor Who, they're all so queer. And I think that all comes from his perspective as a gay man. And I think that having queer storytellers behind these queer stories are so impactful. And I can always tell when it was a production company saying, we need to include diversity, let's include a queer character. And you can always tell when they're doing that. And I think that the reason why Doctor Who... Yeah, exactly. And I think the reason Doctor Who feels so authentic is because it is. It's an authentic person telling authentic stories.
Stories about people they know, experiences they've lived, and writing real people that you would meet in the street.
Exactly.
The second thing I wanted to say as well is that I think recording Wholala, I think for you has been a big thing in reclaiming a lot of childhood joy. For you, really, I think as well, taking something back that you'd felt that at one point you really needed to grow out of, and you sold all your toys to pay for your driving lessons. And I think I think not just, being able to actually get the toys back out the cupboard with me and like have a look at things and be like, oh, this used to be so cool, didn't it? But also actually being able to like talk with people about that and dedicating an hour of the week to actually look back at something that we really love together and going deep into it.
Mm-hmm. I think it's doing that. I mean, yeah, doing this podcast has been very special, I think, for me, and I hope for you as well. But yeah, you said it exactly right. I think you probably more so than me really sort of stuck with Doctor Who the whole time, and I quite openly with a bit of fear as well, admitting this to the Doctor Who community, that I sort of at the end of Peter Capaldi's era, beginning of Jodie Whittaker's, kind of like fell off the train, and I feel like Doctor Who was very much something that I felt like I had to grow out of. Like you said, I've told the story about the driving lesson so many times, but it's true in that I sort of shed my skin. And I think having Ellie on last week talking about, someone who knew me as a kid and knowing that, she's been inside the museum that was my childhood bedroom, to go from all of that, like I literally, full bedroom of Doctor Who stuff, to being able to fit it all inside like one box, a very small box as well, because it kind of felt like something I had to give up. It was something that I shouldn't keep loving. I wasn't allowed to. And I think that doing this podcast has been a really nice way for me to reconnect with my childhood trauma. And I think, like you said, carving out an hour a week to chat with my best friend about one of the things I love is it's been great for me, and I hope that you've enjoyed it too.
It's been nice. It's been fun.
Yeah. It's been very fun. I've loved it.
It's been good. And so naturally, we have a little bit of a sad bit of news, which is that we set out what we did to do. So it's the end of Wholala forever. Haha, just kidding. We will be coming back.
You scared me.
Did I? I'm not coming back. You can carry on. I'm joking.
You need to do a solo episode at some point.
I'm overdue a solo episode. More than once, I've been accused of not being available. But once I wasn't.
Some of those times you weren't available.
At least once. So no, we are doing another series of Wholala, another season of Wholala. Sorry, let's not get ourselves confused. We are now entering a brand new era. Season 2. Ooh, what does that mean? Well, it basically means that we're no longer doing an episode by episode rewatch, but we will still be rewatching episodes, just not in the same linear order. Reason being, we did the maths, folks, and we are not going to get anywhere near the new series anywhere before the time we're kind of in our 40s. So we want to be able to dance around a little bit. We want to be able to explore some of the classics. We want to be able to explore some different series. We want to deep dive certain topics. We want to have that flexibility. And we know that you're going to have different things you want us to talk about as well, especially as we approach the new series with Ncuti Gatwa and the specials later this year. So that's the plan.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that we did season 1 of Wholala, looking back at series 1 of Doctor Who. I think it really sort of helped us find our footing. We're new podcast hosts. This is all new to us. And I think we've learned so much. And I want to bring that into a real crash bang wallop into season 2 of Wholala. And in that breath, we want to hear what you would like to see. One of the reasons that we're moving away from season by season reviews and more into wibbly wobbly timey wimey topics is we want to hear what you would like us to talk about. Are there particular episodes that you love? Are there particular things that you want to hear our opinions on? Are there particular things that you want to talk about? As always, you can reach out to us on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of the above at Wholala Pod, and let us know what you would love to see in season 2 of the podcast.
Please do. But until then, we'll see you later this month.
Yes, I think that's kind of brought us towards the end of the episode and the end of the season. It's a bit of a sad one, but exciting.
We're waving goodbye to 2005 for the minute. We may well be back, but we don't really need to for a little while.
But as we said, this is far from the end of Wholala. This is a new beginning. So we're going to be taking a quick break. a quick break just to catch our breath, but to also get some exciting things ready for season 2. We've got some gears in motions. We've got some things that you don't know about yet happening that we're excited to tell you more about in the coming weeks.
Don't give away too much.
Also, for anyone who wants to come say hi, we will be attending Gallifrey Cabaret at the Royal Vauxhall Tavern later this month, run by the amazing Reese Conley and Carrot, the self-proclaimed drag vegetable. This is an amazing queer Doctor Who event with drag acts and cabaret, and we're very excited to go. So if any of you will be there, we're excited to say hi.
I cannot wait. It's not a meet and greet, let's be very clear. But
oh god,
if
no,
you
far
see
from
us there, wave from across the room. I have astigmatism, so if I don't wave back, it's not you, it's me.
It's not you, it's my stigmatism.
All right, well, we love you so much. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Do remember to like and subscribe. You can rate us 5 stars below. You don't even need to write anything. You can just rate us 5 stars. It's amazing. And that really does help the podcast out. It helps us move up in the rankings and find new Who fans just like yourself.
Exactly. So, as always, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us on season 1 of Wholala, looking at series 1 of Doctor Who. And we will see you very, very soon.
See you soon.
Bye.